After my husband died, I tried to sell his house, but inside was something I never expected. The key felt foreign in my hand, even though I'd turned it in this lock 1,000 times before. 3 weeks had passed since David's funeral, and I still couldn't bring myself to call this place home. It was his house, had always been his house, with its peeling blue shutters and the crooked mailbox he'd promised to fix for 6 years running. I stood on the front porch, staring at the brass nameplate that read The Millers in David's careful handwriting. Mrs. Miller. The title felt like a costume that no longer fit. At 42, I was a widow, and this house was my inheritance, my burden. The October wind cut through my sweater as I finally pushed the door open. The familiar smell hit me immediately. David's Old Spice cologne mixed with the musty scent of old books and the faint aroma of Earl Grey tea. For a moment, I expected to hear his voice calling from the kitchen, asking if I'd had a good day at work. Instead, silence greeted me like an unwelcome guest. I dropped my purse on the entry table and looked around the living room. Everything sat exactly where David had left it, his reading glasses folded on the coffee table, yesterday's newspaper still open to the sports section, his favorite mug sitting on the side table with a ring of dried tea staining the bottom. The hospice nurses had been kind enough to tidy up, but they couldn't erase the evidence of a life interrupted mid-sentence. My sister Rachel had been calling every day from Atlanta, her voice gentle but persistent. "Vanessa, you don't have to do this alone. Come stay with me for a while. That house has too many memories." She was right about the memories, but they weren't all good ones. David and I had bought this place 12 years ago, back when we thought we'd fill it with children and holiday gatherings. Instead, we'd filled it with arguments about renovations that never happened and dinner parties I'd stopped wanting to host. The house had become a silent witness to our slowly settling life, comfortable, predictable, but somehow always slightly out of tune. "This place is special, Van," David used to say whenever I'd bring up moving somewhere smaller, somewhere more modern. "It's got character. History. You can't just throw that away." Character. That was David's word for the drafty windows, the creaky stairs, and the basement that always smelled like damp earth no matter how many dehumidifiers we ran. Now that he was gone, all I could see was a 1960s ranch house that needed new plumbing, a new roof, and about $20,000 in repairs I couldn't afford. I walked through the rooms like a ghost touring her own haunting. The kitchen, where David had made me breakfast every Sunday morning for 10 years. The bedroom, where a side of the bed still held the impression of his body in the mattress. The spare room that was supposed to be a nursery, but had become David's office instead. By the time I reached the garage, my eyes were burning with unshed tears. I needed to start somewhere, so I decided to begin with the easiest task, clearing out David's tools and workshop supplies. Maybe I could donate them to the community center where he'd volunteered on weekends. The garage door groaned in protest as I yanked it open. David's red Chevy Silverado sat in the driveway, another thing I'd need to sell, so the garage had become his sanctuary. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with half-finished projects and coffee cans filled with screws and nails sorted by size. This was where David had retreated when we'd fought, where he'd built the bookshelf that still sat in our bedroom and the bird feeder that hung outside the kitchen window. I started by gathering the obvious trash, empty oil containers, old paint cans, and shop rags that had seen better days. But as I worked, something nagged at me. The garage felt used. Recently used. There was a Subway wrapper tucked behind the toolbox, turkey and Swiss on wheat. David had been a roast beef man his entire life. I'd never seen him eat turkey anything. My hands trembled as I picked up the wrapper. The receipt was still attached, dated just 5 days ago. 5 days ago, David had been in the ground. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe one of his friends had stopped by to grab some tools. Maybe the funeral director had eaten lunch here while arranging the service. People had been in and out of the house for weeks. It meant nothing. But then I noticed the light. A single bulb hung from the ceiling in the back corner of the garage, casting a pale yellow glow over David's pegboard of hand tools. I hadn't turned on any lights. I was sure of it. The switch was clear across the room, and I'd been using the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. My heart started to race as I walked over to flip the switch. The light went out, leaving that corner of the garage in shadow. I flipped it back on, and the bulb flickered to life again. Just a faulty switch, I told myself. David mentioned it was acting up. But David had been meticulous about home repairs. He would have fixed a faulty switch the same day he noticed it. I was about to convince myself I was being paranoid when I saw it. A small pile of crumbs on the workbench. Fresh crumbs. Crackers, maybe, or cookies. David hadn't eaten in the garage. He'd been particular about keeping food in the kitchen, always worried about attracting mice. The rational part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe the paramedics had eaten something while they'd worked on him. Maybe the funeral director had brought snacks. Maybe. I swept the crumbs into my palm and threw them in the trash bag, but my hands were shaking now. The garage suddenly felt too quiet, too still. I had the unsettling feeling that someone had been here recently, someone who knew where to find the light switch and felt comfortable enough to eat while they worked. I forced myself to keep cleaning, but every small sound made me jump. The settling of the house, the whisper of wind through the trees, the distant hum of traffic on Maple Street. Normal sounds that now felt loaded with possibility. That's when I decided to check the basement. David had finished half of it years ago, turning it into a small workshop and storage area. The other half remained unfinished, concrete walls, exposed ceiling beams, and the water heater tucked into the back corner. I rarely went down there. The smell of damp earth and old wood made me claustrophobic. But now I needed to know. I needed to prove to myself that I was being ridiculous, that grief was making me paranoid, that there was a logical explanation for the sandwich wrapper and the crumbs and the light I didn't remember turning on. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. I'd grabbed David's heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen, and its beam cut through the darkness ahead of me. The finished part of the basement looked normal. David's old desk, boxes of Christmas decorations, my grandmother's rocking chair covered with a dust sheet. But as I moved toward the unfinished section, the flashlight beam caught something that made my blood freeze. A blanket. A gray wool blanket, folded neatly and tucked behind the water heater, like someone had tried to hide it. I'd never seen it before. It wasn't one of ours. I crept closer, my breath coming in short gasps. The blanket looked clean, recently washed. And when I knelt down and touched it with trembling fingers, it was warm. Not room temperature warm, but body heat warm, like someone had been wrapped in it just minutes before. I jerked my hand back as if I'd been burned. Someone had been living in my house. Someone was still living in my house. The realization hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been planning David's funeral, signing papers, and crying myself to sleep in our bed, someone had been down here in the dark, eating sandwiches and hiding behind the water heater. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. My mind raced through possibilities. A homeless person who'd broken in? A burglar who'd been watching the house? Someone who knew David was finished and thought the house was empty. The basement suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Every corner could be hiding someone. Every sound could be footsteps above my head. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I burst through the basement door and slammed it behind me, turning the lock with shaking hands. For the first time since David's death, I felt something other than grief. I felt fear. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The locksmith arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, a burly man named Pete who didn't ask questions when I requested deadbolts on every door in the house. While he worked, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, watching him transform my home into a fortress. "You sure you want locks on the basement door, ma'am?" Pete asked, holding up the heavy-duty deadbolt I'd special ordered. "Most folks just use the standard knob lock down there." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "And the garage door to the house, too." Pete shrugged and got back to work. $200 later, I had enough locks to secure a jewelry store. I told myself it was just a precaution, that I'd probably imagine the whole thing. Grief could make your mind play tricks on you. Everyone said so. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. A soft creak from somewhere below. Just one. Like someone shifting their weight on the basement stairs. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, then hung up before it could ring. What was I supposed to tell them? That I'd found a blanket? That I'd heard a creak? They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been the house settling. Old houses made noise. That's what David always said when I complained about the sounds at night. But when I went to make coffee, I found the kitchen window cracked open about an inch. I never opened that window. It stuck badly, and you had to use both hands to force it. I slammed it shut and checked the new lock on the basement door. Still secure. 3 days passed like this, small things that could have been nothing. A dish moved from the counter to the sink. The thermostat adjusted by 2 degrees. The faint smell of shampoo in the downstairs bathroom that I rarely used. Each incident could be explained away. I was distracted by grief, forgetting things I'd done myself. But together, they painted a picture that made my skin crawl. Someone was in my house, moving through it like a ghost, careful not to leave obvious traces. On Thursday night, I'd had enough. I made a show of going to bed early, turning off all the lights and making sure my bedroom door was closed. But instead of sleeping, I sat in the dark hallway at the top of the stairs, clutching David's old baseball bat and listening. At 11:47 p.m., I heard it. The soft whisper of socks on hardwood. Footsteps in the kitchen, light and careful. Then the gentle squeak of the basement door opening. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept down the stairs, avoiding the third step that always groaned. The basement door stood slightly ajar, and I could see the faint glow of light from below. Not the harsh fluorescent bulb, but something softer. A flashlight, maybe, or candles. I eased the door open wider and peered down. The stairs disappeared into shadows, but I could hear movement, quiet, purposeful sounds like someone rearranging furniture. Call the police, my rational mind screamed. This is breaking and entering. This is dangerous. But something else drove me forward. Maybe it was anger at having my grief interrupted by fear. Maybe it was the stubborn streak that David always said would get me in trouble. Or maybe I just needed to know who had been invading my sanctuary. I grabbed the biggest knife from the kitchen block and David's heavy flashlight. My hands shook as I started down the basement stairs, trying to step quietly on the outer edges where the wood was less likely to creak. The sounds grew clearer as I descended. Not rearranging furniture, someone was packing. I could hear the rustle of papers, the soft thud of items being placed in boxes or bags. At the bottom of the stairs, I flicked on the flashlight and swept it across the basement. "Don't move," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. "I've called the police." The beam caught a figure in the far corner, and for a moment, we both froze. It was a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with dark skin and natural hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was crouched beside a small camping setup, a sleeping bag, a battery-powered lantern, and what looked like a week's worth of carefully organized supplies. Her eyes were huge with terror as she stared into the flashlight beam. "Please," she whispered, raising her hands. "Please don't hurt me." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping the knife raised even though my hands were trembling. "What are you doing in my house?" The girl's eyes darted around the basement like she was looking for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. I was blocking the only way out. I'm not trespassing," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know how this looks, but I'm not." "You're not trespassing?" I interrupted, my fear turning to anger. "You're living in my basement. You've been eating my food and—" "He let me stay here," she said quickly. "I swear to God. He told me I could stay here. I didn't know he was—" She trailed off, and I saw tears starting to stream down her face. "I didn't know he was gone until I saw the obituary in the paper." My blood turned to ice. "He? Who's he?" The girl took a shaky breath and spoke one word that shattered my world. "David." The knife nearly slipped from my hand. "David? My David? David Miller?" She nodded, still crying. He said I could stay here as long as I needed.
He said it was okay.
He said he'd talk to you about it when the time was right." Talk to me about what? I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. The girl looked up at me with David's eyes, the same deep brown, the same long lashes that I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. When she spoke, her voice was small and broken. "My name is Imani," she said. "I'm his daughter." The flashlight slipped from my numb fingers and clattered on the concrete floor, its beams spinning wildly before settling on the wall. In the wavering light, I could see the truth written in her face, the curve of her nose, the set of her shoulders, the way she chewed her bottom lip when she was nervous. Just like David. The basement spun around me as I realized that my husband, the man I'd loved and trusted for over a decade, had been keeping a secret that changed everything. Not just about him, but about us. About the life we'd built together. About the man I'd buried 3 weeks ago. I sank down onto the stairs, my legs unable to support me anymore. His daughter. I repeated numbly. "You're his daughter." "No." The word came out flat and hard. I stood up from the stairs, my legs shaking. "No, you're not. David didn't have children. He would have told me." Imani flinched at my tone, but she didn't back down. "I know how this sounds." "You know how this sounds?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know how it sounds that a stranger breaks into my house and claims to be my deceased husband's secret daughter? It sounds insane." "I didn't break in," she said quietly. "I have a key." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a brass key identical to mine. My mouth went dry. "He gave me this 2 years ago," she continued. "Said I could use the basement entrance whenever I needed to. Said it was safer than the streets." "Safer than the streets?" I repeated. "What does that mean?" "Look, I know you don't believe me," Imani said, pushing herself to her feet. "But I can prove it. I know things about him. Things only family would know. Anyone could find out things." "He drinks Earl Grey tea every morning at exactly 6:30, she interrupted. 2 sugars, no milk. He reads the sports page first, then the obituaries, then the front page. He hums when he's working on projects, usually old Beatles songs. His favorite is Yesterday. He talks to himself when he's frustrated, and he always checks the locks twice before bed." Each detail hit me like a physical blow. These weren't things you could Google or learn from watching someone. These were the intimate quirks of daily life, the small habits that only someone who lived with David would know. "He calls his coffee mug Old Faithful," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's the blue one with a chip on the handle. He won't drink coffee from anything else. She hesitated, then looked directly at me. "He calls you Van when he's happy and Vanessa when he's worried about something." My knees nearly gave out. David's pet name for me was something we'd never discussed with anyone. It was ours, private, meaningless to the outside world, but precious to us. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "Because he talked about you," she said simply. "All the time. He said you were the best thing that ever happened to him, but he was afraid that if you knew about me, you'd leave." The words twisted in my chest like a knife. Why would I leave? If you were really his daughter, why wouldn't he just tell me? Imani's eyes filled with tears again. Because of who I am, because of where I came from, because he was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Of having a daughter who lived in foster care. Of having a baby with a 17-year-old drug addict when he was 18. Of losing track of me for 15 years and only finding me again when I was already. She gestured around the basement. Already this. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still wouldn't believe it. David had been open about his past, about growing up poor in Detroit, about his teenage years when he'd gotten into trouble. But he'd never mentioned a girlfriend, never mentioned a child. "He called me Dee," Imani said quietly. "Just like his mother used to. Just like in the letters." "What letters?" "The ones in the attic. The ones he wrote to me, but never sent." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "He showed me once. Said he'd been writing to me for years, trying to find the right words to explain. But he never mailed them because he didn't know where I was." Without another word, I turned and headed for the stairs. I needed to see these letters. I needed proof that this girl wasn't just an elaborate con artist who'd somehow learned David's habits. The attic access was in the hall closet, a pull-down ladder that David had installed when we'd first moved in. I hadn't been up there in years. The space was cramped and hot, filled with Christmas decorations and old furniture covered in dust sheets. But in the far corner, behind a box of David's college textbooks, I found them. A shoebox tied with string, worn from handling. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Imani Washington, in David's careful handwriting. None of them had been mailed. The return addresses were different. Our old apartment, then this house, spanning nearly 20 years. My hands trembled as I opened the first one, dated 3 months after our wedding. Dear Imani, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I had to write it down. Today I married the most wonderful woman in the world, and all I could think about during the ceremony was whether you were okay, whether you had enough to eat, whether anyone was taking care of you. I've been looking for you for 5 years now. The social worker said your mother moved to Chicago, but I haven't been able to find any trace of either of you. I hope that means you're safe somewhere, happy, with people who love you. I should have fought harder to keep you. I should have been better, stronger, more ready to be a father at 18. But I was scared and stupid, and I let them take you away. I think about you every day. I dream about you. I wonder if you have my eyes or your mother's laugh. I wonder if you're good at math like me, or if you love books like Vanessa does. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday I'll find you, and we can try to be a family. Even if it's too late. Even if you hate me. Your father, David. The letter slipped from my fingers. I grabbed another one, dated just 2 years ago. Dear Imani, I found you. God help me, I finally found you, and I don't know what to do with that. You're beautiful. You look so much like your mother, but you have my stubborn chin and my terrible handwriting. You're living in a group home on the south side, and the social worker says you age out of the system in 6 months. I want to take you home. I want to give you your own room and help you finish high school and be the father I should have been 16 years ago. But I'm terrified of what that would mean. How do I tell Vanessa that I've been looking for you our entire marriage? How do I explain that I kept the secret because I was afraid she'd think less of me? I'm going to try. I'm going to find a way to bring you home. Love, D. I read letter after letter, each one a window into a part of David's heart I'd never known existed. The last one was dated just 3 months ago. Dear Imani, you've been staying here for almost 2 years now, and I still haven't found the courage to tell Vanessa about you. I keep thinking there will be a right time, a perfect moment when I can explain everything without losing her. But I'm starting to think there is no right time. I'm starting to think I'm just a coward. You deserve better than this basement. You deserve a real family, a real home. You deserve a father who isn't ashamed of his past. I'm going to tell her soon. I promise. After Christmas, when things settle down, I'm going to tell her everything. I love you both so much. I just hope I can figure out how to love you both together. D. I sat in the dusty attic, surrounded by 20 years of secrets, and finally understood. David hadn't just been hiding a daughter from me. He'd been hiding his own shame, his own fear, his own desperate love for a child he'd lost and found again. And now they were both gone from my life, leaving me alone with the truth he'd never been brave enough to tell. When I finally climbed down from the attic, my legs felt like water. The letters were clutched in my hands like evidence of a crime I hadn't known was being committed. Imani was sitting on the basement stairs, her camping gear packed in a worn duffel bag beside her. I'll leave tonight, she said without looking up. I know you hate me. I don't hate you, I replied automatically, then stopped. Did I? The emotions churning in my chest were too complex to untangle. Anger, yes. Betrayal, definitely. But hate? I wasn't sure I had enough energy left for hate. You should, she said quietly. I ruined your marriage. I ruined your life. My marriage was already ruined. I snapped, then immediately regretted the harshness. I'm sorry. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. Imani stood up, shouldering her bag. And you're right. He chose me over you, didn't he? He chose keeping me secret over being honest with his wife. The words hit like a slap, because they were true, and I'd been trying not to think about it. David had made a choice, and it hadn't been me. Where will you go? I asked, hating myself for caring. She shrugged. I've got friends. I'll figure it out. I always do. How old are you? 21 last month. 21. Just a kid, really. A kid who'd spent her whole life figuring things out on her own. Stay, I said, the word surprising us both. Just stay tonight. It's late, and I need to think. Imani studied my face, looking for signs of pity or manipulation. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she set her bag back down. I'll sleep on the couch, she said. I won't bother you. The basement's warmer, I heard myself say. And you've got everything set up down there already. We stood there in awkward silence, two strangers bound together by a deceased man's secrets. I wanted to ask her 1,000 questions, but I didn't know where to start. Are you hungry? I finally asked. I could make some eggs. I don't want to be any trouble. You're already trouble, I said, but there was no venom in it. Might as well be fed trouble. We ended up sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, eating scrambled eggs and toast while carefully avoiding each other's eyes. But gradually, in the way that exhaustion and shock can sometimes break down walls, we started to talk. I learned that Imani had aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to survive. She'd been working dead-end jobs and sleeping in her car when David found her. He didn't just offer me a place to stay, she said, pushing eggs around her plate. He offered me hope. Said I could take art classes at the community college. Said I had talent. Art classes? I draw. Mostly portraits. She hesitated, then pulled a worn sketchbook from her bag. David said I was good enough to maybe get a scholarship somewhere. I opened the sketchbook and my breath caught. The drawings were incredible, faces rendered in charcoal and pencil with such skill that they seemed to breathe on the page. But they weren't random faces. They were people who looked lost, sad, searching. They're beautiful, I said softly. Who are they? People I've lost, she said. Foster parents who were kind to me. A friend who overdosed. My mother. She turned a page, and I saw a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. David said drawing them helped him understand why I was so guarded, why I had trouble letting people get close. I kept flipping through the pages, mesmerized by the raw emotion in each portrait. Then I turned to a page near the back and froze. It was me. Not a perfect likeness, but close enough to be recognizable. I was smiling in the drawing, but there was something wistful in my eyes, something lonely. How did you? I started, then stopped. My throat felt tight. He showed me a picture of you, Imani said quietly. From your wedding. Said you were the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, but that you'd never understand about me. What did he mean? He said you grew up in a perfect family. 2 parents who loved each other, a sister who was your best friend, a house with a white picket fence. He said you'd never understand how someone could lose a child and spend 20 years looking for them. I stared at the drawing, remembering the conversation David and I had had early in our marriage about children. I'd been so confident then, so sure that families were easy to build and keep together. I never understood his reluctance to have kids, his fear that he wouldn't be a good father. He was protecting you, Imani continued, from people like me, from the messy, complicated parts of his life. He was protecting himself, I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. Maybe both, she said. Maybe that's the same thing. I closed the sketchbook and looked at this girl, this young woman, who had David's eyes and his stubborn chin. For the first time, I tried to see the situation from David's perspective. A teenage father who'd lost his child to the system. A man who'd spent decades carrying that guilt, that failure. A husband who'd found his daughter again but couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between his old life and his new one. I think I helped him lie, I said suddenly. What do you mean? I mean I made it easy for him to keep secrets. I never asked hard questions. I never pushed when he got distant or changed the subject. I let him have his mysteries because I thought that's what love was, giving someone space to be themselves. Imani was quiet for a long moment. Maybe it is, she said finally. Maybe loving someone means accepting that they have parts of themselves they can't share, even when they want to. Or maybe it means fighting harder to understand them, I said. Maybe it means not letting them carry their ghosts alone. We sat in silence, two women who'd loved the same man in different ways, both of us trying to understand how we'd ended up here. The house seemed to settle around us, and for the first time since David's death, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like we were finally hearing what he'd been trying to say all along. 3 days later, I made the decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to call the police. I wasn't going to press charges for trespassing or breaking and entering. Imani hadn't broken into my house. She'd been invited. And despite everything, despite the lies and the secrets and the complete upheaval of my life, I couldn't bring myself to put David's daughter back on the streets. You can stay, I told her over breakfast on Wednesday morning. Temporarily. Until you figure out what you want to do next. Imani looked up from her cereal, suspicious. Why? Because David wanted you to have a safe place, I said. And because maybe I need to understand what he saw in you that was worth keeping secret. I don't need your pity. Good, because I'm not offering it. I'm offering you a roof and some time to make a plan. Nothing more. She studied my face, looking for the catch. When she didn't find one, she nodded slowly. Okay, but I pay rent. I'm not a charity case. With what money? I'll get a job. I'll figure it out. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's lawyer, Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Miller. His voice was formal but kind. I apologize for calling so early, but something has come to my attention regarding your husband's will. What kind of something? David left specific instructions about a sealed envelope that was to be given to you only if certain conditions were met. I believe those conditions have now been satisfied. I frowned. What conditions? I'm afraid I can't discuss the details over the phone. Could you come to my office this afternoon? Say, around 2 o'clock. I glanced at Imani, who was pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. I'll be there. Peterson's office was the same generic law firm space where I'd signed the probate papers 3 weeks ago. Dark wood furniture, law books, and the smell of leather and old paper. But today, Peterson seemed nervous, fidgeting with his pen as I sat across from his desk. David was very specific about this, he said, pulling a manila envelope from his safe. He said I was to give this to you only if his daughter came to live with you. My heart skipped. His daughter? He was quite clear about it. He said if a young woman named Imani ever moved into your house, I was to contact you immediately. Peterson handed me the envelope. This was sealed 23 months ago. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter in David's careful script and a small gold key that I didn't recognize. My dearest Vanessa, if you're reading this, then my worst fear and my greatest hope have both come true. My worst fear because it means I'm gone, and I never found the courage to tell you about Imani myself. My greatest hope because it means you've met her and maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to give her the love I was too scared to ask for. I need you to know that every day I didn't tell you was a day I hated myself a little more. Not because I was ashamed of Imani. God, no. She's the most resilient, talented, beautiful person I've ever met. I was ashamed of myself, of the 18-year-old boy who got scared and let the system take his daughter away, of the man who spent 20 years telling himself he was protecting his new life when really he was just protecting his pride. I never told you about Imani because I didn't want to lose you. I couldn't bear the thought of you looking at me differently, of you thinking I was the kind of man who could abandon a child. But I realize now that by keeping it secret, I was abandoning you both. I wanted to do right by both of you. I just didn't know how. The key opens a cabinet in our bedroom closet behind the winter coats. I've been saving pieces of Imani's life for 20 years, hoping that someday I'd be brave enough to share them with you. Maybe now they can help you understand who she is and who she's always been to me. I love you, Van. I love you enough to hope that you'll forgive me for being a coward. I love you enough to hope that you'll see Imani the way I do, not as a mistake or a burden, but as the missing piece of our family. Forever yours, David. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. Peterson tactfully busied himself with paperwork while I composed myself. Thank you, I managed to say. I need to go home now. The drive back to the house felt like a dream. I found Imani in the kitchen, washing dishes. She looked up when I walked in, and whatever she saw in my face made her set down the plate she was holding. What happened? She asked. Without a word, I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her eyes growing wider with each paragraph. He wrote this almost 2 years ago, she whispered. Before he even told me about you. He knew, I said. He knew that someday I'd need to understand. I pulled a small gold key from my pocket. Come with me. In our bedroom closet, behind the winter coats David had hung there 6 months ago, I found a small wooden cabinet I'd never noticed before. It was tucked into the corner, painted the same color as the wall. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a treasure trove of memories. School photos dating back to kindergarten, report cards, a tiny hospital bracelet from the day she was born. There was a small wooden box containing a baby tooth, a lock of hair, and a silver charm bracelet with a single charm, a tiny letter D. He kept everything. Imani breathed, picking up a photo of herself at maybe 10 years old, gap-toothed and smiling at a school picnic. He kept everything. At the bottom of the cabinet was a thick album. Inside were photos I'd never seen. David as a teenager, holding a baby who was obviously Imani. David at her high school graduation, standing in the back of the auditorium. David at her 21st birthday, celebrating with cake in what looked like a group home common room. He was watching over you, I said softly. All these years, he was watching over you. Imani was crying now, holding the charm bracelet to her chest. I thought he just felt guilty about me. I thought I was his burden. You were his joy, I said, and realized I meant it. He just didn't know how to share you with the world. For the first time since David's death, I felt like I understood him completely. Not the man who'd lied to me, but the man who'd loved so desperately that he'd rather carry his joy in secret than risk losing it. Looking at Imani surrounded by 20 years of careful devotion, I finally understood what David had been trying to tell me all along. Love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it lives in shadows, in small acts of preservation, in the careful tending of hope that someday the light will be bright enough to reveal all the beautiful, complicated truth. I didn't keep the house. Even after everything, after understanding David's secrets, after finding Imani, after discovering the depths of love that can exist in hidden spaces, the house still felt like a keeper of too many secrets. The walls had absorbed too many unspoken words, too many careful silences, too many moments when the truth had been swallowed back down. But I didn't sell it right away either. We'll clear it out together, I told Imani in May, when the last of the snow had finally melted and the daffodils David had planted years ago were pushing through the soil. Room by room. Take our time. She looked at me suspiciously, the way she still did when I offered anything that might be construed as kindness. What's the catch? No catch. But I think we both need to say goodbye properly. So we spent the summer dismantling David's life, and in the process, building something neither of us had expected. Some days we fought. God, how we fought. The first big blow-up came in June when I found Imani sorting through David's clothes without asking. Those were his favorite shirts, I snapped, snatching a blue button-down from the donation pile. He's not coming back for them, Vanessa. She shot back, emphasizing my full name like a weapon. Don't you think I know that? I yelled, and then we were both crying in the middle of the bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of a man who'd loved us both but never figured out how to put us in the same room. Other days we laughed until our sides hurt. Like the afternoon we found David's secret stash of chocolate hidden behind the winter boots, or when we discovered his collection of terrible dad jokes written on index cards and carefully filed alphabetically. Listen to this, Imani giggled, holding up a card. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. He told me that one on our second date, I said, wiping tears from my eyes. I should have known then he was a keeper of terrible secrets. Slowly, carefully, our relationship began to shift. At first, Imani called me Vanessa with the careful politeness of a houseguest. Then, gradually, it became V. David's nickname spoken in her voice felt like a bridge between past and present. The day she first called me Miss V, we were painting the kitchen together, getting more paint on ourselves than on the walls. "Miss V, you've got primer in your hair," she said, then froze as if she'd revealed something she hadn't meant to. "Miss V," I repeated, testing the sound. "I like that." "Yeah."
"Yeah."
"It's ours." By July, we'd settled into a rhythm that surprised us both. I helped her enroll in community college for the fall semester, using some of the money from David's life insurance to pay for her art classes. She helped me learn how to live alone in a house that was finally truly quiet. "You need to get out more," she told me one evening as I sat on the couch grading papers from my summer school class. "When's the last time you went to a movie? Or out to dinner with friends?" "I don't really have friends," I admitted. "David and we mostly just had each other." "That's not healthy," she said, but not unkindly. "Come on, there's an art show downtown tonight. Local artists. You should see what real talent looks like." She dragged me to the gallery opening, where I watched her talk to other artists with a confidence I'd never seen before. Watching her explain her portraits to strangers, I saw not David's hidden daughter, but a young woman with her own dreams, her own voice, her own light. "You're proud of her," said a voice beside me. I turned to see an older woman with paint-stained fingers. "Your daughter's very talented." "She's not my daughter," I said automatically, then paused. "But yes, I'm proud of her." Later that night, as we drove home through the summer darkness, Imani said quietly, "You didn't correct her about the daughter thing right away." "No, I didn't." "Why not?" I thought about it as I turned onto our street. David Street? Really, though soon it would belong to neither of us. Because maybe being family isn't just about blood. Maybe it's about choosing to love someone even when it's complicated. "Is that what we're doing?" she asked. "Choosing each other?" "I think so. Are you okay with that?" "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I am." In August, we put the house on the market. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Susan, asked if we wanted to stage it or if we preferred to sell it empty. "Empty," we said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. The house sold quickly to a young couple with a toddler. They loved the big backyard and the breakfast nook where David used to read his morning paper. They didn't seem to mind the quirks, the drafty windows, the creaky stairs, the basement that always smelled like earth. "They'll be happy here," I told Imani as we watched them do their final walkthrough. "Yeah, they will. This house needs people who aren't afraid of their secrets." I'd found a small apartment closer to the college where I taught, and Imani was moving into the dorms for her freshman year. We wouldn't be living together anymore, but that felt right somehow. We'd found each other in David's shadow, but now we needed to discover what we could be in the light. On moving day, we stood in the empty living room one last time. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits. "Do you think he'd be happy?" Imani asked. "About us, I mean." "I think he'd be amazed," I said. "This isn't what he imagined when he wrote all those letters. This is better." "Better how?" "Because we chose this. Not because of guilt or duty or trying to honor his memory. Because we decided we wanted to be in each other's lives." We locked the door behind us and left the keys with the realtor. As we drove away, I caught sight of Imani in the passenger seat, sketching in her notebook. "What are you drawing?" I asked. "Us," she said simply. "The family we made ourselves. Not mother and daughter. Not stepmother and stepdaughter. Something new, something ours. Something that David's love had made possible, but that we had chosen to build together. Family by choice, bound not by blood or law, but by the decision to keep showing up for each other, even when it was messy, even when it was hard, even when we didn't know what we were doing. Especially then."